Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to another episode of Islam for Europeans. Please like and subscribe to the channel. I wanted to make this video about why, especially in Canada, but also I hear in the UK as well, and to an extent the United States and pretty much every Western country, um, most mosques will usually hire a foreign-born imam, as opposed to a first generation Muslim or a second generation Muslim or a convert, and why that is, and what are the underlying reasons for that. Now, I'm not going to turn this into a diatribe. I'm not doing this to denigrate imams who do a lot of work, a lot of good work for the community, who have spent years in Islamic scholarship, who have taken the time and the effort to basically run a mosque and do all the things that an imam does in the West. But I do think that it points to the fact that there are certain things that boards of mosques or people who own mosques will value over other criteria. And what is the effect and what is the fallout of almost always hiring an imam who comes from another country. Now, when Islam was first established, in Canada, and you had Muslims coming to the West, there is this feeling and this sentiment that we're here to stay, we're establishing ourselves, we want to build something for the new generation. And I remember as a young convert, there were many Muslim youth, and the mosque would try really hard to keep the Muslim youth in the mosque, and being active members of the mosque and giving them leadership roles and whatnot, because they had this idea that this is going to be the new generation of leaders, and we're training a new generation of leaders, right? And that was 21 years ago when I first converted to Islam, right? And now in 2024, and I've been to many mosques in many different cities in Canada, and you almost always see the same thing, that the board will almost always hire an imam that was not born in Canada. Um, so there's definitely effects of this, that were followed of this that I'll get into. But first, we want to talk about why this is, right? And I think one of the big reasons is, um, this in you got to understand, in Muslim societies and Muslim cultures, um, they place a big amount of respect on age, right? So like, it's always the older, the more experienced, they have the most say. It's really taboo to even critique people who are older than you, right? And the boards of mosques are usually made up of brothers, almost always brothers, who are at least 50 years old, right? So by default, they're going to pick someone older, right? So and most of the Muslim youth or first generation Muslims, they're definitely younger. And even many first generation uh, Muslims living in Canada and the UK, they've moved on, from mosques, even if they're still practicing Muslims, even if they have a high level of religious education. There's just so much dirty politics involved in board decisions, um, like and whatnot. So that's definitely a factor. But also with the age factor is also the experience factor. Like, it's the old adage that we want your degree, now I want a master's degree. Now I want a master's degree and 5-year experience. How do you get 5 years experience? Well, you have to get into the job market, right? So a lot of these imams have already been imams of other masajid elsewhere, right? So they already have that under their belt. And the board will usually hire these people because they already know basically how things roll, right? So that's another factor. There's the financial factor. Being an imam in the West, at least in Canada, it doesn't pay well, right? And when you have first gen, second gen Muslims, even if they have a high level of the qualifications of being an imam. Usually their parents, want them to be a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer. Or, just, why would you know, go through all this education, get a master's degree, get an Islamic education, and then at the end of the day say, you know what, I'm going to take a job at the mosque. I'm going to be there all the time. It's going to pay me $30,000 a year when I can just be a product manager, or a doctor or a lawyer elsewhere and make 60, 70, 80K, right? So, being an imam, usually, from what I understand, it doesn't pay. And, a lot of these masajid will hire imams coming from, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Pakistan, and because they're trying to they're trying to establish themselves in the West. So a lot of these imams, their residency or their PR status or getting their green card rests upon them getting a job at the mosque. And this brings me to my next point. The board wants someone that they can more easily control. Like if you are an imam who is just trying to get into the West, who's trying to get their PR status, you have to basically stay as the imam, or you might have to go back, to your home country, right? So, the board will look at this and go, you know what, we can basically tell him what to do. We can, move him around like a chess piece. We can give him all these responsibilities, and this will, be a lot easier than trying to control a first gen or a second gen Muslim. Even though they're more culturally experienced, like they could just take off whenever they want. They're more brazen, and they might just say, you know what, I don't want to be an imam anymore. If they control them too much, and might get a job elsewhere, right? So that's another consideration. They want someone that they can easily control that will stay in the area, right? So those are some I guess financial, geographical factors. But what about educational factors? You know, there's a especially among boards, there's this idea that of tradition, that we want to have someone with the same school of thought that doesn't waver, that agrees mostly with us. And if we bring in someone who's a first gen or second gen Muslim, and they're more they may have like softer stances on certain things because they're living in the West. That's not exactly what we want. So we want to get someone who's trained in Islamic studies. And the highest level, the best schools to get your Islamic education is Medina University, Al Azhar University, right? And most people who go there, unless you have the funds, already live in those regions. So you could be a first gen or second gen Muslim, and go to one of the Islamic institutions in North America. And that's another thing. In the United States, they already have some Islamic colleges there. They have Zaytuna College. They have many Islamic institutions where you can actually train to become an imam. But in Canada, these are pretty much non-existent. They haven't really gotten the funds to really train for this. So if you have a stack of resumes, you say, well, this person studied at maybe even like a Western institution, and and then you have five more resumes for people from Al Azhar. Those people are going to be at the top of your pile, right? But people who train at Al Azhar, they're more likely to come from that region, because travel costs are less, and then everything like that. So that's another reason. And there's like I said, boards will the mosque board will usually place far more emphasis on things that are important to the mosque goers, right? So I mentioned, when I first converted, there was a lot of Muslim youth. You don't see that much anymore in 2024. Yes, you do see some. It depends on the mosque, but usually when I go to prayer now, might see like maybe a dozen young brothers. When I was converted in 2003, it was packed. They made up like 30, 40% of the congregation. But you don't see that anymore. So the board will be like, well, we want someone who's, well trained in Arabic, who's fluent in Arabic, because, a lot of the congregation, you know, many of them have broken English. They lose a lot of their Arabic. They miss speaking Arabic. and they want someone trained in the language of the Quran. So they'll place a lot of emphasis on someone who is as fluent as humanly possible in Arabic, that is an excellent Quran teacher, right? Um, which is important. I'm not denying the importance of that, right? But when you compare that to someone who speaks fluent in English, because let's face it, many, not all, but many, imams who come from the West, their English, it's not at the level of a native speaker, right? And this can really result in some negative outcomes that people don't really see all that often. You know, they might actually make mistakes in akida, or like cultural issues dealing with the Bible or Christianity that they don't really understand, right? So like that's basically like another factor. Like there are certain things that they're looking for, that boards are looking into to get an imam that comes from the Muslim world, as opposed to even a board. I'm talking about board Muslims here, board Muslims who are first gen, second generation Muslims, right? Um, so that's one of the many. I could go on. There's many factors why they choose to hire mostly foreign-born imams, and there might even be an element of nepotism. Like we already know this imam. He knows people through the grapevine, and in places of employment, usually that's how that is. You get hired at a certain company, and they're looking for employees. They'll tell you, look, certain, if you know someone who is has expertise in the field we're looking for, right? So it's at times it's like a who's who, right? So it's a very structural issue, and it really has a lot of negative outcomes that a lot of people don't realize, and a lot of people don't want to admit either. One thing that I talked about was the Muslim youth. Like if you have like a first generation or second generation Muslim there, being the imam, that's someone that you can look up to. That's someone that you can resonate with. That's someone that you can have like a good conversation with. That's at your level, right? And many of the imams who come from other countries, they don't really understand the culture. They don't understand certain holidays. They don't really reach out to the non-Muslim community, and even if they do, like it's really hard for them sometimes to even start conversations about things, right? And I'm not saying that it's all bad. There are some advantages to having imams that come from other countries, as opposed to first generation, second generation Muslims. uh they're a lot of these imams, some of them, they haven't had time or years to be influenced by kind of like this cultural Marxist ideology that they're pushing in Western schools. um they haven't really had time to really immerse themselves in non-Muslim society. um Many of them haven't really been to like protests, or hang out on social media, where you hear nothing but people who hate Islam ragging on you. So usually the only non-Muslims that they usually meet are either at the mosque itself via like an open house, or someone who reaches out to the imam, or like a dawa booth, right? So there's I guess the interactions that imams have, especially when they are just fresh, coming from a Muslim country, oddly enough, ironically enough, is sometimes better than sometimes Muslims who've been here for several generations, right? So what's the solution to this? I mean, I don't think that you can really solve this issue, because the boards that run mosques, they're you know what happens normally is that you have usually a schism, between the old guard at the mosque and the new guard. And the new guard will usually stay there. They'll stay there for a couple of years. They'll want to change things. They'll see things that being run in the mosque they don't really agree with, right? And they want things to change. So some boards will have elections, where you can run for like a certain member to be like maybe the Dawa director or the public relations director and whatnot. But usually this will end up in like some sort of schism, and usually it's between the new guard and the old guard. And most times often than not, the old guard wins out, and the new guard, after some cataclysmic event like an election that didn't turn out in their favor, or maybe they shut down the youth center because they were selling um, bottles that looked like alcohol but contained no alcohol in it, or maybe some convert painted this beautiful artwork on the wall, and then the old guard just took some green paint and just painted right over it. That's when the new guard will be like, you know what, forget this. I want nothing to do with this mosque. I'll go somewhere else. And that's when the old guard just basically takes over. And the next imam they hire is usually going to have the same qualities that I talked about earlier in the video, right? And like I am not referring to any one particular individual. I think this is a structural problem. I've been to many different cities in Canada, and I you see the same thing over and over again. And Muslims that I talk to who go to other masajid, they report to me the same thing. And it it becomes a major roadblock, because the imam basically is the leader of your community. That's someone who is basically the representative of the community. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, on an individual level, someone coming from another country being the imam. If they're well trained in English, if they're willing to understand the culture that they're living in now, if they're willing to talk to non-Muslims on a regular basis, if they're willing to dialogue with the convert's family if need be, you know if you have all the at least some of those criteria, like I don't see a problem. But when it's a structural problem like this that has occurred generation after generation, where you just keep bringing in new imams, it creates really problems, and it turns a lot of people away from the mosque. Um, so I guess the best solution is, if you belong to, say, quote unquote, the new guard, and I'm not talking about being a modernist, like, we want to stick to our Islamic principles. I'm talking about, you know, things that are greatly affecting, our image as Muslims in the West, greatly. What's our attitude towards the homeless? What's our attitude towards, Muslim women? What's our attitude towards non-Muslim women? What's our attitude towards converts, family members? You know, um, you know, do you understand, the cultural significance of things like the Super Bowl? Things like that. So, I think as the new guard, you need to, you can't give up. You have to at least grab some like-minded people and try to make positive change. For those, who are so hard-headed that they can't budge, and they can't see, you know, the effect of what they're doing on, like, how it affects the greater society. There's nothing that you can do. Halas. I mean, there's a level in Jannah, a lower level of Jannah, the people who give up arguing, even if they're right, right? But I do think that, we just can't give up on the mosques, because, these are Islamic centers. This is like the heart of the community. And, the last thing we want people to do is to be unmosqued, right? So, so that's basically how I feel about that, you know. And I'm not even talking about converts becoming imams, like in a lot of the stuff we focus on converts, they say Robbie's focusing too much on converts. Just forget about that for now. Just even first generation, second generation Muslims, they need to be the next imams of the community. And, the leadership, Muslim leadership, the boards of these masajid need to realize, like, if we're just going to keep, bringing imams in, from another country, and, like, on a revolving door basis, like every 3 4 years, they leave and we bring in somebody else. Where's the sustainability, right? So, yeah. And on a final note, again, we do have the Darul Uloom. I mean, Darul Uloom, they train these kids, for 6 years, to become, like, leaders of the Muslim community. And I know, they mostly strictly follow the Hanafi madhab. I know that they mostly, they learn Arabic and Urdu, but at the same time, like, they're born and raised here. They understand, their English is fluent, and, like, you're training a whole new generation of imams. Where are they? They don't end up having any type of leadership role in the mosque. They end up doing their, master's degree, their MBA in business, or whatever. So that's my time for the day. Controversial subject, I know, and I'm not referring to anyone individual. I'm looking at more of a structural level, and I'm not denigrating any one particular individual. But I do think that this is an important topic that needs to be talked about, or else we're just going to keep having the same problems generation after generation uh, until, God forbid, a'udhu billah, it all falls apart. So let me know what you think in the comment section. I'm Robert from Islam for Europeans. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.